Okay, so before we get into that, I just will share with you briefly a review from last week. We had a history leading up to the Exodus. We had some interesting connections and parallels between Moses and Yeshua. And then we also talked about some connections between the judgments of the gods of the Egyptians and possible judgments against the gods of the modern world in the end of days, especially in the book of the Revelation. So that was what we talked about last time. This time, what we're going to discuss is chapters 10 through 13 in the book of Exodus is Torah portion go or come. That's what bo means. I like to think of it as Yah speaking to Moses and saying, come to Pharaoh. What does that imply? That Yah is already with Pharaoh. Come, I'm over with Pharaoh. I want you to talk to him. Instead of go and talk to Pharaoh. It just, that word bo can mean come or go. So I like to think of it in that way. But in this Torah portion, we have the plague of the locusts, the plague of darkness, the instructions for the Passover and the Passover memorial, two separate things there, the death of the firstborn, and the beginning of the Exodus. And then immediately at the end in chapter 13, we have what I consider to be some of the first instructions of the Torah that happened prior to Mount Sinai. We have some specific instructions regarding the dedication of firstborn of men and animals. Men, I mean men and women. Firstborn males, I think it's just firstborn males, because of the firstborn male deaths in Egypt. So I wanted to start by talking briefly about the judgments on Egypt's gods, on the gods of Egypt. We spoke about that at the end of our last session, and I wanted to actually pull out a couple of pieces of text that will illustrate this, I think, a little bit more poignantly. So I previously pointed this out, and I want you to remember that Pharaoh believes what about himself? He's an Egyptian Pharaoh. Who does he think he is, most likely? He thinks he's a god, or at least a demigod. Like son of Ra, son of Osiris, one of the most high gods. He's like the representative, and this varies according to the king and how highly he thought of himself, but at the very least a demigod. I just want you to keep that in mind, because I want to share a passage with you that I think will be instructive in a way that I hadn't seen before, and I want you to consider this with me. So here is this passage, and it's from Exodus 10 and 9. This is Exodus chapter 10, verse 9 and 10. And here's what it says. When he says, well, who's going with you? Pharaoh says to Moses, who's going with you out of the land of Egypt? And Moses says, we will go with our young and our old, and with our sons and our daughters, and with our sheep and our cattle we will go, because we are to hold a chag, a festival, a feast. This is the first time in the Torah that word appears, for Yehovah. And he said to them, presumably Moses and Aaron, and the he is Pharaoh, Yah will indeed need to be with you if ever I release you and your dependents. Watch out. Trouble is right in front of you. Now, your English translation may say something slightly different, but I want you to look at the Hebrew translation that I have right there on the screen for you. It says, Ra neged penaichem. Now, that literally translated into English says, I want you to watch out because evil is in your face. Now, what's the word for evil? Ra'ah, which I believe might be a play on the fact that the Egyptian chief god is Ra. Okay, so it's interesting that the Hebrew word Ra'ah, or Ra, is evil. And it's possible that what Pharaoh is saying to Moses, I think he might be egging him on a little bit, giving him a little bit of grief, saying, Ra is standing right in front of you. So I believe that he may be taunting Moses slightly. Now, what is Ra the god of?
Sun.
The sun. Okay, so now consider what happens immediately after this. The plague of the locusts comes in immediately on the heels of this exchange between Moses and Pharaoh. And there's an interesting phrase that we're going to read in just a moment, but it literally says that the locusts are so thick that darkness covers the land. Okay, that's interesting. And I don't know, I saw a YouTube video a couple of years back that was just fascinating regarding locusts. Okay, we haven't had like massive locust plagues since the days of Egypt, but they happen, especially in the Middle East and in Africa. I saw a video one time where there was a massive swarm that literally blotted out the sun practically. And they landed on this little town somewhere in northern Africa, and when they flew away the next morning, everything was gone. Anything that used to be green, trees, flowers, bushes, grass, even synthetic materials on lawn chairs and stuff. If it had a cloth covering or a nylon covering, anything like that covering the furniture, it was gone. They ate it all and flew off within a space of 6 hours. It was all gone. And so, and it darkened the land because it was like a cloud cover. It was so thick. So that's what happens immediately after this exchange, where he's saying, behold, perhaps he is saying, behold, Yah is standing right in front of you. Yah better be with you if ever I let you go. I have the power of Ra at my disposal. And then immediately after that, this plague of locusts comes and brings a partial darkness to the land. What's the immediately next plague? A plague of darkness that is so thick you can feel it. I don't know if you've ever been in darkness that was so thick you could feel it. It's almost like it's tangible. Now that's an interesting thing. That's almost like a sensory deprivation when you are in such a place that is so dark that you can almost feel the tension in your body from complete pitch black. That's an unusual experience, and most humans don't experience that very often. But that lasted for 3 days. Now, do you think that I think that a challenge was issued here, and we have God saying, let me talk about your God, Ra. Then no problem. We can put him to bed right away. Yeah. We'll put him down for a nap. So I think that that's fascinating. Now, I want to just briefly share with you a couple of comparisons and similarities between some of these plagues and in the book of Revelation. So I have a couple of passages that I want to share with you in that regard. So looking at Exodus 10 and Revelation 9, and I will read the relevant passages for you. I want to compare these two plagues of locusts, because there is a plague of locusts in Revelation and a plague of locusts in the book of Exodus. Look for similarities and differences. Are you ready? Revelation 9 and Exodus 10. Okay, so let's take a look at this. In Exodus 10 and 12, this is where we're going to start, 10 and 12, where it talks about the locusts in specific. Yah said to Moses, extend your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come up over the land of Egypt and eat everything that grows in the ground, everything that the hail has left. So Moshe extended his staff over the land of Egypt, and then Yah brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. The morning came, and the east wind had brought up the locusts. The locusts went up over all the land of Egypt and settled down in all the territory of Egypt. It was very severe. There had never been locusts like them before, nor will there be ever such again. They covered the surface of all the ground, and the land was darkened. And they ate all the vegetation of the ground and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Nothing green remained on the trees or on anything that grew in the fields throughout the whole land of Egypt. Now, that's the plague that strikes in Egypt. Now I want to read for you Revelation chapter 9 that also talks about locusts. Now these are slightly different locusts. But note some similarities and differences. Revelation chapter 9, verse 1, it says, "Then the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth, and he," that is the star, "was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. He opened the shaft of the abyss, and smoke rose out of it like smoke from a giant furnace. The sun and the air were darkened with smoke from the shaft." There's some kind of darkness coming over the land. "Then out of the smoke came locusts onto the earth, and they were given power like that of the scorpions of the earth. They were told not to damage the grass of the earth." You notice that? They're not to touch any green thing, whereas the other locusts destroyed all the green things. "Or any plant or tree, but only those people who do not have the seal of Elohim on their foreheads." Were the people in Egypt protected from the plague?
Yes.
They were. Remember that only the first 3 plagues in Egypt affected the Hebrews at all. That was frogs, blood, and what was the third one? Gnats. Okay, so they had to put up with some irritations for sure. But then there was a division between the Egyptians and the Hebrews. There's a division here as well. So the locusts were not given permission to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the torture was like that of a scorpion when it stings a person. Has anybody been stung by a scorpion in here? I've been stung twice. It's not fun, but it's not horrible.
Is it worse than a bee?
No, I don't. Yeah, it's just similar. So in those days, people will seek death, but will not be able to find it. They will long to die, but death will flee from them. Now the locusts looked like horses equipped for battle. On their heads were something like crowns similar to gold, and their faces looked like men's faces. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like iron breastplates, and the sound of their wings was like the noise of many horse-drawn chariots charging into battle. They have tails and stingers like scorpions, and their ability to injure people for 5 months is in their tails. They have as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, Apollyon. Now that's fascinating. There are several interesting similarities and differences between these 2 plagues of locusts. You have the servants of Yah being protected in each one, because previous to this chapter, the people of Yah had somebody go through there and mark them on their foreheads to separate them out for protection. We have natural bugs versus some kind of demonic hell bug. Who knows what that is? Or how many of you actually think that is something that is not a metaphor? That is something that people sometime will actually see something that looks like that. It's awfully descriptive for something that's maybe a figure of speech or a metaphor. I've often thought about that. It's like when the prophet goes into incredible detail about what something looks like, you'd have to be extremely clever to say, well, that's a metaphor, and we need to figure out what each of these descriptions means and metaphorically. It makes it much more challenging. It's like saying the third temple is metaphorical, and yet Ezekiel spends like 4 chapters going into exquisite detail. How are you going to interpret that metaphorically? That's going to be really challenging. So that's one of the things about Revelation that really causes me some heartburn. But there's a lot of interesting similarities. We have these insects in the book of Revelation are told not to harm anything green, and yet the ones in Exodus are told to, well, they just eat everything green. There ain't nothing green left. So that's fascinating. And what I want you to consider as you continue your readings, and you may look back and do this, you can pretty easily also online, people have done this, is compared all of the plagues of Egypt versus the plagues in the book of Revelation, and they line up pretty nice. It's very interesting stuff. So this is why, and there's also a lot of prophecy passages in many of the other prophets that point to this idea that a lot of people postulate, which is there's a greater exodus. And I know how many of you have heard this phrase, the greater exodus. So yeah, that's very common in our Hebrew roots circles regarding a second Exodus. And I know that you're familiar with this. I will read a couple of passages to you that kind of connect these things. And I think that we talked last week about Paul in the book of Corinthians talking about why these things were written for our instructions, upon whom the end of the ages have come. So we should absolutely learn from these people's examples. So I want to share a couple of these passages from from the prophets with you that talk about these similarities. Now here is before I do that though, I want to share something very interesting with you. This is kind of an interesting note. Notice in chapter 11, flip over to chapter 11 in Exodus. Before I go to that prophecy thing, I want to just talk briefly with you about Moses and Pharaoh. Note in chapter 11, verses 1 through approximately 3, it says, Yah said to Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt, and after that he will release you from his place. And when he releases you, he will drive you out completely from this place. Instruct the people that each man and each woman is to request from his or her neighbor items of silver and gold. Thus, they're going to plunder the Egyptians when they leave. Now, here's the interesting part in verse 3. Now, Yah granted the people favor with the Egyptians, so that when they asked them for stuff, they were like, yeah, absolutely, here you go. Moreover, the man Moshe was very great in the land of Egypt, respected by Pharaoh's servants and by the Egyptian people. So, Moses has a tremendous reputation, and why wouldn't he? This is the guy who is able to call down the power of gods, or God. They're not quite sure probably what's going on here, but he has tremendous power at his disposal, lickety-split, bam, bam, bam. The wise men of Egypt, they dropped off a while back and told Pharaoh, what are you doing? You're going to kill us all. We cannot compete with this. So what's fascinating to me is that what do we know about Pharaoh's character? We spoke about it a moment ago. He thinks he's divine. But what does the scripture teach us about Moshe's character? He was the most humble man around. I think there's an interesting and powerful lesson there, in that it says that Moshe had great honor among the people and among the court of Egypt. I want you to imagine briefly, how does that make Pharaoh feel? Threatened and insecure and envious, and probably, I would have to assume that it drove him to madness and rage. Because you know how powerful and influential people are. They will bite and scratch and claw for power and influence and try to manipulate this and that. That's Pharaoh. But Moshe, you notice the one thing about most good leaders when they're called up to service? I ain't interested. I ain't interested in serving. I have zero interest in being in charge of anything. And you really need to coax these people out. We need you, we need you. That's kind of, according to the legend, that's what they did with George Washington. It was like, we need you to come and lead the nation. He's like, no, I ain't interested in that. That turns out to be a great president, you know. So what's interesting to me is that only the humble will get true power. And Moshe had tremendous power because he didn't want it. He was truly humble. But what also occurred to me is that it might have been, this is just speculating, it might have been through this very mechanism that God hardened the heart of Pharaoh. Do you imagine that? That he is so incensed by this stupid Hebrew prophet having tremendous power that every time Moses shows up and is able to do some tremendously powerful miracle and make him and his whole court look like idiots, that just steals his heart all the more. He probably is blind with rage. Perhaps that is what is meant when it says that God, if God did exert something on his heart, he put his servant Moses right in front of him and said, here, deal with my humble servant Moses, who has tremendous power like you could only dream of. That had to have made Pharaoh insane with anger and rage and jealousy and envy. And just having Moses in his face probably drove him mad, probably drove him crazy. And he had no choice but to fight, to keep putting up a fight. Because every time Moses showed up, it just brought it back to the surface. It was just an idea that occurred to me, and it was absolutely fascinating. But now I will read for you a couple of passages regarding the connection between end times and these prophecies in the book of the Exodus. So here it says, regarding the wealth of the nations, Isaiah 60 and 5 through 6, it says, "Then you shall see and be radiant, and your heart will thrill and exult, because the abundance of the sea shall be turned to you, the wealth of the nations shall come to you." This is like a plundering of all nations. This is not just a plundering of Egypt when the children of Israel leave Egypt. This speaks of a plundering of all nations. And then in Isaiah 61, the very next chapter, verse 6, it says, "But you shall be called the priests of Yah. They shall speak of you as the ministers of our Elohim. You shall eat the wealth of the nations, and in their glory you shall boast." So I'm seeing echoes of this plundering of the nation when this Exodus happens. And then this next passage is from Zechariah. We just read this a while back when we were doing the book of Zechariah. "Even Judah will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations shall be collected, gold, silver, and garments in great abundance." It's interesting that the specifics that are mentioned about the children of Israel plundering the Egyptians talks about articles of silver and gold and clothing, the exact same things that are mentioned here in the book of Zechariah. And then in Haggai, "I will shake all nations, and what is desired by all nations will come, and I will fill this house with glory, says Yah Almighty. The silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares Yah Almighty." Now that's a fascinating connection. This is one of the strong scriptures that strongly point to a second Exodus, a repeat of the book of Exodus at the end times. Now here's another couple of passages which kind of go, this is the book of Revelation in chapter 21, 24 through 26. "The nations will walk by Jerusalem's light, and the kings of the earth will bring their splendor into it." That word splendor is kind of interesting. You have to kind of look that up. It's glory, prestige, perhaps wealth. The glory and honor of the nations will be brought into it. So there's some definite strong connections here. And then Jeremiah 16 talks about this second Exodus in specific. "Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares Yah, when it shall no longer be said, as Yah lives who brought up the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt, but instead, as Yah lives who brought up the people of Israel out of the north country and out of all the countries where he had driven them, for I will bring them back to their own land that I gave to their fathers." Now, unfortunately, most people will attribute that to some type of a resurrection of the Jewish people, and they believe that that is only connected to the Jews. Now, I do not believe that. I believe that that is certainly a part of it, but remember, you are grafted in to the nation of Israel. So you will be gathered and collected and brought into the Holy Land. Now, is what is happening in the Holy Land now connected to that? I would consider that the people who are in the Holy Land now are almost like a first fruits offering. You know what I'm saying? That's like a down payment. You know how it is in the Bible. It talks a lot about how Judah goes first, right? So Judah goes there first and almost like sets the place up, and then the Messiah comes and brings everybody in. I'm completely speculating, and Deb's looking at me like I'm like,
where does it say that?
Where does it say what?
What you just said.
Oh, like Judah comes first. That's Tracy. Oh wait, yeah, Brett, Mike, Tracy. Thank you.
As you say earlier, Jeremiah explains.
I was just going to comment on. There seems to be more prophetic word about the Jews accepting Messiah last. Mm-hmm. So I kind of question whether they would go first if they're the last to accept.
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know what I'm talking about, No, I mean that in a funny way, because I have something in my mind about Judah going first. I'll have to look that up. It's a great question. I know that that's somewhere. I'm going to have to look it up.
There is, talk in Revelation about these 144,000 of the tribes of Israel being the first fruits.
Right.
So they're,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's
Yeah,
fair.
that's a good question. Good question. Thank you for bringing that up. Then.
It's oral talking. I mean, ever since I've been in this walk, which was years and years ago, that's all I ever heard. Jews.
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
not against the Jews. Trust me, it's
I
not that.
understand.
It's just everybody wanted to be a Jew, and I'm like, I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. And so I had to do a lot of studying. I'm like, where does it say it in there that the Jews are? I just can't find it.
And that's
Well, they received the gospel first.
They did receive the gospel
And they
first.
rejected it.
They did receive the gospel first, and many of them did reject it. There's some good questions around that, and we'll have to look at that a little bit deeper. Osmundo would like to pipe in. What's up, Osmundo?
Hey, I think the scripture you're referring to when you talk about Judah goes first is Torah when they were going out into battle.
That is correct. That is correct.
Where would that be?
That is in the book of Numbers, I believe.
Genesis 18.
What?
What was it?
Judges 2018.
Judges 20:18. That's an interesting passage.
18.
Yeah, and it does talk in the book of Numbers about how Judah goes first when the tribes move because they go into battle in that formation. And so some people have speculated, it's coming back to me now, some people have speculated that is still playing out in the end times, and that's why the tribes of Judah went to the land first and almost like softened up the enemy and took some ground, making way for that. Now, I don't know. They are obviously the last in mass to accept Messiah Yeshua, and I think that we saw this when we were looking at the book of Zechariah, how there will be great battles surrounding Jerusalem, and it seems like all is lost, and they're getting the tar hammered out of them, and then Messiah Yeshua shows up and rescues them, and perhaps it's at that point that there is a broader acceptance of Messiah Yeshua at that time. I'm not sure. We're entirely speculating now. But you can look at some of these other passages in Jeremiah 23, 7 through 8, and Isaiah 11, 11 through 12, and Ezekiel 36, verse 24, has very similar passages talking about this idea of a greater exodus. So you can kind of take a look at that. It's certainly fascinating stuff. Now, what I want to deal with next, I think we've pounded that dead horse a little bit regarding the Exodus and prophecy. It's a fascinating subject, and it's very, very relevant. But now I want to take us to the next chapter of Exodus chapter 12, and we're going to look at the Passover of Egypt and the actual memorialization, because I think we need to cover this in some little bit of detail because Passover is coming right up, and it's delightful that we have the opportunity to prepare our hearts and get some fresh instructions regarding Passover when it's just a couple of months away. Keep it fresh in our minds. So, if you will, you can open up your Bibles to the book of Exodus chapter 12, and I will begin reading for you. It's story time with Uncle Alan. You guys ready? Okay, here's what it says. Yah said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month is to be your beginning of months. It will be your first month of the year. Tell the whole community of Israel, on the 10th day of this month, they each must take a lamb for themselves according to their families, a lamb for each household. If any household is too small for a lamb, the man and his next door neighbor are to take a lamb according to the number of people. You will make your count for the lamb according to how much each one can eat. Your lamb must be perfect, a male, 1 year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You must care for it until the 14th day of this month, and then the whole community of Israel will kill it around sundown. Now, around sundown is actually between the evenings. We've already gone over that. I know a lot of you have. They will take some of the blood and put it on the 2 side posts and top of the doorframe of the houses where they will eat it. They will eat the meat the same night. They will eat it roasted over the fire with bread made without yeast and with bitter herbs. Do not eat it raw or boiled in water, but roast it over the fire with its head, its legs, and its entrails, its insides. You must leave nothing until morning, but you must burn with fire whatever remains of it until morning. This is how you are to eat it: dressed for travel, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. You are to eat it in haste. It is Yah's Passover. I will pass through the land of Egypt in the same night, and I will attack all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both of humans and of animals, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. Notice that? Executing judgment on the gods of Egypt. I am Yah. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, so that when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and this plague will not fall on you to destroy you when I attack the land of Egypt. This day will become a memorial for you. Now, this is where the subject slightly shifts. We are moving away from this is what's going to happen in the land of Egypt to this is what you're going to do in future generations to memorialize what happened over here, okay? This day in verse 14 will become a memorial for you, and you will celebrate it as a chag, a festival to Yah. You will celebrate it perpetually as a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you must eat bread made without yeast. Surely on the first day you must put away yeast from your houses, because anyone who eats bread made with yeast from the first day to the 7th day will be cut off from Israel. On the first day there will be a holy convocation, and on the 7th day there will be a holy convocation for you. You must do no work of any kind on them. Only what every person will eat, that alone may be prepared for you. So you will keep the feast of unleavened bread, because on this very day I brought your regiments, your hosts, out from the land of Egypt, and you must observe, keep, guard this day perpetually as a lasting ordinance. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month in the evening, you will eat bread made without yeast until the 21st day of the month in the evening. For 7 days yeast must not be found in your houses, for whoever eats what is made with yeast, that person will be cut off from the community of Israel, whether a resident foreigner or one born in the land. You will not eat anything made with yeast. In all the places where you live, you must eat bread made without yeast. There's a whole lot of talk about yeast in this passage. Then Moses summoned all the elders of Israel and told them, go and select for yourselves a lamb or a young goat for your families and kill the Passover animals. Take a branch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply it to the top of the doorframe and the 2 side posts, some of the blood that is in the basin. Not one of you is to go out the door of his house until morning. For Yah will pass through to strike Egypt, and when he sees the blood on the top of the doorframe and the 2 side posts, then Yah will pass over the door, and he will not permit the destroyer to enter your houses to strike you. You must observe this event as an ordinance for you and your children forever. When you enter the land that Yah is giving you, just as he said, you must observe this ceremony. When your children ask you, what does this ceremony mean to you? Then you will say, it is the sacrifice of Yah's Passover, when he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, when he struck Egypt and delivered our households. The people bowed low to the ground, and the Israelites went away and did exactly as Yah had commanded Moses and Aaron. Now that is absolutely fascinating. I find that to be just awesome. So the question that often plagues us, and this is where we get wrapped around the axle a lot of times in regard to how do we celebrate the Passover? What is our practice here? What can we do? What should we do? Are there things that we should not do? I think it starts with a very clear delineation between what happened in Egypt and what happens to memorialize what happened in Egypt. That's why I pointed that out to you. Not only was it important for Yah to tell them exactly what to do in Egypt, he told Moses to tell the people what to do to memorialize it, and then we have Moses telling the people some more details about what to do to memorialize it. So memorializing it is where we're at. Okay, so what are some things that you see in the description of the actual Passover event that are things that we would not do today because that was exclusive to that event? Anyone? Jerry?
I say we're not going to kill a lamb, we're going.
Okay, so we're not going to kill a lamb or a goat, at least not in a sacrificial manner.
It's already been done.
Right, exactly. Osmundo.
Eating the lamb in haste with your loins girded and not leaving it until, you're supposed to eat it before sundown or sun up rather.
Right.
So
Now that's a great observation, Osmundo, and I would say you're right. I would have one caveat to that, okay? Now, and I don't know this for a fact. I didn't have time to look this up, but you should if you want to consider this. It's not necessary to eat the Passover with the staff in your hand and your go bag on your back. I mean, a lot of people do that because they have adopted a tradition of, well, if there's a second Exodus coming and we're going to be leaving Egypt at some point, then maybe we should. I think there might be some truth to that. It's something to consider. But what about what Osmundo said was, I've lost my train of thought. I apologize.
leaving the lamb until morning.
Yes, leaving it until morning. That's an interesting conundrum because, first of all, yes, you need to. Why do you think that none of it was supposed to be left over until morning when they left Egypt that time? Think about this. Think about it from Yeshua, from a Yeshua perspective.
He was taken off the cross and put in the grave because it was becoming the high day.
Right.
First day of Feast
Right.
of Unleavened Bread. And all this is prophetic, pointing towards it.
Okay, now consider this. The difference between the body and the blood of Yeshua. The blood of Yeshua, every Christian knows about the blood of Yeshua. What most Christians don't understand is the body of Yeshua. And I am not talking about you, although I could be in a certain sense. Okay, so if you have the blood of this sacrificial lamb, we're putting it on doorposts, right? Who's seeing that?
The destroyer.
Yah, or the destroyer that he sent. We're inside. We're instructed not to leave our houses. I ain't peeking my head out, right? The blood's on the outside. So something out there needs to see the blood on the doorpost in order to know this one is protected. Okay? Now, what's the body for? Now, that obviously that has a very interesting and powerful corollary. Did I say that correctly? To Yeshua the Messiah. Yah looks at you with the blood of the Messiah applied to you and says, that one's mine, where he's protected. It's like having a mark on your forehead. It's a good way to look at it. Now, what is the body for? What is the significance of the body of this lamb? But think about it from a very practical standpoint. The children of Israel are about to leave Egypt.
Energy.
It's energy, it's food, it's power. It's the energy that your body needs to go on a long walk. Protein, baby, and lots of it. Eat it all up. And if you can't eat it, burn it. You don't want any of it going bad. Now, there's some spiritual interesting principles about why you would not leave any of it overnight. But consider this. There are sacrifices in the Levitical system where you're not supposed to leave that overnight. It must be burned with fire. Now, is the Passover one of those? That's where I need some clarity because I haven't looked that deeply into it. So there might be something to that. Now, I know that there are some Messianics who will say, well, we're observing Passover, we're having chicken, we're having lamb, we're having beef, whatever. We're not going to leave any of it over, and we're going to burn it in the morning. We're going to burn it before morning comes. That's fine if you want to do that. I don't see the scripture saying that that's what you should do because there's no sacrifice. Okay, Yeshua is the sacrifice. There was only one sacrifice during the Passover itself. Now, during the times following, you could not, this is a sacrifice. And you can't make a sacrifice in any old place that your heart desires. So when it is time for the Passover, as you see in the book of John and all the other Gospels, when the people are all streaming to Jerusalem with their lambs to have the priest kill that lamb, then they take home the meat and they eat it with their families. You can't sacrifice this Passover lamb in your backyard. So if anybody thinks they're doing a sacrificial service on a Passover lamb, and I do have heard of people who do that, I would say that is an absolute no-no. Absolute no-no. Okay, do not be slaughtering a lamb in some ritual fashion and thinking it's a Passover sacrifice. I would say absolutely not. Okay, if you want to kill a lamb, it's like, I'm killing a lamb because I'm going to eat it for my Passover meal. Fantastic. Do not in any way, shape, or form get that into your mind that you're doing some kind of animal sacrifice, some kind of a Passover sacrifice. No, 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 no. Never, ever, ever. And I think that's what partially reason that we don't have a temple anymore. We lost that privilege, and the Messiah Yeshua became especially the Passover sacrifice that does not ever need to be repeated. Now, the meat of this animal, as Brett pointed out, is to ingest the body of this animal. It fuels you, and it gets you going so that you can take a long journey. Now, if there is a connection, what is that in a spiritual, metaphorical sense today? What is the body of Messiah? The words, yes. Yes, I think that's about as good as you're going to get. The words of our Messiah, the Word of God, period. In fact, if you want to extrapolate that and say that his body is you, well, you are giving each other the strength to take this journey. Do you know how tough it would be if you were alone in this world today as a believer with no fellowship, disconnected from people, nobody praying for you, nobody giving you encouragement, nobody connecting with you and seeing how you're doing and praying with you, sharing your struggles, sharing your challenges with? That is the body that you need to ingest to be able to make it on this journey. Fair enough? Okay. Now, let's get down to some brief practical stuff. The Passover is coming up. And I want to point out to you, I want to share something with you on my screen, and I swear this is the last slide, I think. Because I'm not a huge slides guy. I don't usually share that many slides, but I did have quite a few this evening, and I apologize. But here's my next slide. There are multiple references to strangers and aliens and sojourners in this passage in regards to who can be involved in this Passover and who cannot. There are at least 3 and possibly 4 different terms in this passage, just between Exodus 12:45 and 48. There is ger, as in Gershom, a stranger there. This is a resident alien who lives among the Israelites permanently and has generally accepted their customs. That is a person who is grafted in. There's a proselyte, someone who's grafted in. Now you've got a toshav, often just translated as a sojourner or a temporary resident. That is someone who is in the land but is not of the land, not of the people. That person may not eat of the Passover meal. Then you've got the sakir, translated as a hired worker or a hired servant. Okay, so you need to pay attention to who is being discussed here, because we know, and I have told you this many times regarding our Passover, I personally think, and you can, it's okay if you want to, you don't like me anymore and you don't want to follow me or whatever. I'm all good with it. You should not go to a mass Passover event. They should not be holding a mass Passover event. You should not rent a ballroom and have hundreds of people coming to your Passover event. That is never in the spirit of this thing. It is a lamb per house. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody, hey, all of you go and, eat a lamb, and if you can't eat the whole thing, bring over some friends. I am not suggesting that. What I am suggesting is that you must be in covenant with this God, or you cannot eat the Passover. This is not a vehicle for sharing the Hebrew roots of our faith. Come and check out how awesome this is. Look at what you're missing. Bring them in and see how they like it, and come and do it. No. That's not for them. Okay, now, here's where you might get into some trouble. Can a Christian eat the Passover? Now, I know some of my hardcore brethren here are going to say, absolutely not. They're not Torah observant. You're going to fight me on that. That's okay. That's okay. We're going to fight about that, and I'm okay with that. If you have the Spirit of Messiah in you, you are His. You may be slightly ignorant about the Passover and the festivals and the holy days and what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat, and I get that. But you're going to have a hard time convincing me that those people are unqualified to eat the Passover. However, I think of it as you don't want to use the Passover as an evangelistic tool. In our fellowship, I don't necessarily want people coming in and gawking, even if they're just regular old Christians, coming to gawk at this cool, interesting service. Because it's fascinating, it's interesting, and I just want to check it out. I don't think that's appropriate. I really don't. I think it's for some of us who understand what it means. I'm not trying to be exclusive. I'm not trying to say I'm better than you, or we're in a special club and you can't be a part of it. What I am saying is it's a serious thing. And we are trying to be in covenant with our God. And I don't want someone to come and eat of a Passover meal because they're testing the waters, they're dipping their toe into it, they're thinking, oh, this is kind of interesting, I'll check it out. That just strikes me as slightly sacrilegious. It's just not treating it with the gravity with which it deserves. And this is not the word of Yah. I think that I have the spirit of Yah, but this is open to debate. I'm giving my opinion. Okay? Now, I know that some of you are going to be looking for a microphone.
Yeah.
We're not going to have a huge argument about this. We're not going to have a huge discussion about it. I'm simply telling you this. In our fellowship, that's how we do it. You guys want to do it? There's other people out there who do it a different way. That's okay. This is my opinion about how we should do it. And that's all I would have to say on that issue. I'm going to Osmundo and then Brett.
I actually agree.
What?
I agree that the Christians should, because they are part of the body of Messiah. I would just add this caveat is what Torah instructs is the males must be circumcised. If they're uncircumcised, they cannot partake.
Good Lord, Osmundo.
I'm sorry if there's young hairs. I don't know who's there. But that's what Torah requires to partake in the Passover is that Abrahamic covenant.
Okay, hold on a second now, Osmundo. God bless you, you wonderful human being. We got some people in-house who are saying, you got to have a circumcised heart. Now, wait a minute now. Hold it.
But that's not what Torah says. Torah says, because if we start adding to Torah, Jehovah says, do not add, do not take away from this book of the law. So when we start spiritualizing it and Christianizing it, then that's a different, we can't go that route. We have to stick to the text, and the text says about the circumcision. But if they are and they are of Messiah, but they're not Hebrew roots, then
somebody's asking if you want the job as a circumcision inspector. No, but here's the thing I would say.
No thanks.
No thanks. No, here's what I would say. You're going to have a little bit of trouble on your hands if you say, the text clearly says that no one who is not circumcised may eat of it. You have to be circumcised to eat of it. Now, you might, be tempted to say, well, that's a spiritual circumcision of the heart. You'll get no argument from me. However, when you say that, you are standing on a slippery slope, because you start spiritualizing these very clear physical commands. It's like, it's real easy to say, well, Yeshua is our Sabbath rest. So we don't need to literally observe the Shabbat,
But that's
right?
not written. The circumcision of the heart is Torah. And it's written.
It is.
And it's
It
written.
is.
So you can't, it's not
It
over-spiritualized.
absolutely is. It absolutely is. And yet, all of our ancestors physically, literally circumcised the penises of their children.
They don't
So-
even do it correctly today.
Well, I don't know anything about that. I am not a circumcision expert.
Well,
But
there's
what
a-
I will say is there is a physical command to be physically circumcised. Now, of course, that means circumcision of the heart. Of course it does. But I am simply telling you that you are on a slippery slope when you say, is it physical or spiritual? Yes. In my opinion, yes. It is physical and spiritual. Now, am I saying you need to be circumcised to come to our Passover? That is not my business. I have zero interest in that. That is between you and our Father. If you're saying, Father, I don't think that I literally need to be physically circumcised. My heart is circumcised. Then you go right ahead. That's fine. My personal preference is I want to be physically circumcised. That's just my opinion. I am so sorry for those of you who that offends or disappoints. It's all good. Somebody just left. No, I'm just kidding. Somebody just joined. Now, I know that Brett would like to say something, and Vincent, do you still want to talk, Vincent? Just put up your hand if you do. Okay, I'm coming right back to you, Vince. Brett.
Yeah, you nailed it when you said the ger, the stranger who sojourns. It's the ger who's goring, or the one who is trying to live in accordance with the Torah, sojourning, because there's also the nasa or the tzur. In English, we just have like stranger or someone who sojourns or
Like a
alien
temporary
or
resident.
foreigner. But when you look in the Hebrew, it's very specific what each one of them means.
Right.
And then in Acts 15, those guys were doing the same thing. They were strangers who were sojourning. And as they got more and more knowledge, then they would come under covenant. And then the acrobustia became, and that's where 1 Corinthians,
Right.
you read 1 Corinthians 11, 27 through 32, and you read that sincerely so that you discern who the body is and what it means to be having the sign, the seal, and you really understand.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating that there are essentially two signs of the covenant. One of them is circumcision, and the other is Shabbat. Those are the two signs, literally physical signs of the covenant. So it's something to think about.
The whole 10 Commandments.
Right. So Vince.
Yes, hello. I'd like to a quick question actually. This is about the previous thing that you were talking about, that people that can't partake. In the first one, you said it was about people who got grafted in. Now, does that? I don't know if I just misheard, but like, now does that apply to like Gentiles who follow Messianic, or something completely different?
If I understood your question when I was talking about these different categories of people who are in Egypt and are supposed to take part in the Passover, is that what you're asking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say
The previous one now.
Yeah, I would say.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The words and this is what Brett was talking about, was the ger, the toshav, and the sakir. The ger is absolutely a resident alien who lives among the Israelites permanently and has generally accepted their custom and has been grafted into their community. I would say that is very similar to a Christian or a Hebrew roots person who has become part of Israel, however you want to look at that, whatever those two categories are. So yes, in our estimation, every believer in the God of Israel should be observing the Passover, right? Only it's us Hebrew roots people who are doing it. Christians are not doing it. They're doing something else. Easter. Unfortunately. Some weird pagan Ishtar thing. So that's unfortunate, and that happens a lot. So, yes, I would say all of us believers in the Messiah Yeshua, whether Hebrew roots or not, are grafted into Israel. It's just that most of our brethren do not recognize that. They think of themselves as Gentiles still, and don't recognize their own identity. They're lost in their, not lost in the sense of eternally lost, but their identity is lost. They don't remember who they are, which is kind of interesting because that was prophesied that would happen to the 10 tribes who got scattered across in the middle of the world. They would forget who they were, and they would worship foreign gods, and they would lose all remembrance of Yah and his ways. So it's not unusual. It was prophesied. So there's that. Anybody else have other questions about that? I know that's a big can of worms. Any other comments, observations, questions regarding that Passover stuff? Okay, so let me just kind of place it into a small nutshell for you to be able to keep control of the situation. Today, what must we do? Shout it out. What are we supposed to do?
Examine yourself.
Oh, what?
Examine yourself.
Like eating the little cracker and the wafer and the ever let every man examine his heart?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Gabby?
I think it's important that we observe here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Absolutely. Yeah. So let me ask you this, Luke. When you say observe what? I mean, we observe that it's there, but could you be a little bit more specific about what do you mean by observe? What is commanded?
Observing this biblical feast, which is representing us internalizing the Torah.
Okay. Excellent. 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 What else?
So we get rid of the leaven in the house?
That is, I think that was very strongly indicated.
Basically everything except for the matzahs.
Right, and here's a good question. I looked into this, and I have for years, and I'm convinced, and you can disagree if you like, it's fine. A lot of contention going on here, Deb.
No, I'm just saying.
No, not with you. I'm not saying you. I'm saying this is some contentious stuff that we're dealing with here, but I'm going to just say, are you not supposed to eat leaven, or are you commanded to eat unleavened bread? Because it seems to me pretty clear that you are commanded to eat unleavened bread. Now, somebody might say, well, I'm sorry, gluten intolerant. I'm not eating any gluten at all. I don't eat bread, period. Okay, that's fine. I think you're not eating leaven, clearly. So, but I look at this and I go, man, it sure seems like you're supposed to be eating unleavened bread. I'm sure they have gluten-free. You make gluten-free matzah.
Just something's gluten-free doesn't mean it's leaven-free.
True. Yes, don't confuse gluten-free with leaven-free. That's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up. But I look at this and I say, this seems pretty clear that you are not supposed to be eating leaven, and you are also commanded to be eating unleavened bread. Now, I ask you, we've had conversations before about what is leaven and what does it represent spiritually. If you had one word to describe it, and I'm going to ask Tracy this because I know she's going to cut to the point and tell me straight up, what is leaven, Tracy?
It's any false word that produces sin. That's to kind of put it in a nutshell, because you can say it's sin. You can trace it back to
Any faulty word that produces some fruit other than the fruit of the Spirit, which would be sin. Okay, so that is as good as definition as I've ever heard of leaven. So, spiritually speaking, you are supposed to get rid of the leaven out of your house. Now, if you are to interpret this passage to say you are commanded to eat unleavened bread, what might that signify? Do you see any metaphorical, spiritual significance to eating unleavened bread? Osmundo.
Being mindful of keeping sin out of your heart.
False doctrine.
Okay.
Eating humble pie.
Eating humble pie. That's a good one. Yes.
I see this kind of, I mean, not like a total one, but
Give her a mic. Thank you. There's your MC, so that these people online.
I
can
kind
hear.
of look at it as a way of like fasting, like a form of, not like fasting, but it's like a, fasting in a spiritual sense.
It's
like
a certain sense of humbling
taking away,
yourself, isn't it?
those indulgences, maybe that you
Yeah.
that you need to
Yeah.
rid yourself of.
Well, let me ask you this: is unleavened bread likely to appeal to your fleshly desires? No, it tastes like cardboard. I mean, unless you eat Tracy's unleavened bread, it's actually quite good. But I think it might be missed the point. It's supposed to taste like cardboard. It's supposed to get you in a humbled state, in a humbled position. Why would you want to be or need to be in a humble state at this time of year specifically?
Because the focus is on everything Yeshua did for you. It's not.
That's what I'm saying. It's like a form of fasting.
It's like a form of fasting. Yes, so it makes sense to me.
Withholds that remove things that are.
Yeah, remove temptations of the flesh.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what, I discover more and more all the time that, especially for men, the ingestion through the mouth, what comes into the mouth and what goes out of the mouth, powerful, powerful stuff. The lust of taking in things, the physical appetites of a man, like Esau type stuff. It's like, give me some of that stuff, The physical appetites are really, really powerful. And when you are fasting, you are basically saying, I am exercising control over my flesh. No, sit down and be quiet. I'm taking charge of my flesh. Eating unleavened bread, does that mean that you should only eat unleavened bread for 7 days? Wouldn't that be something? You know what? I might try that. I have a suspicion. You want to hear my suspicion, and you should test it and let me know if I'm right. I would bet you any amount of money. I don't have any money, so don't tempt me. If you were to eat unleavened bread and only unleavened bread for 7 days straight, what do you think would happen to you?
Weight loss.
You would probably lose weight. What else? All of the inflammation from the sugar and the processed foods would probably go away and be like, wow, I feel great. Hey, don't quote me on that, but it wouldn't surprise me. It would not surprise me if you were literally to eat unleavened bread for 7 days straight. I would be surprised if you didn't feel like $1 million. Really would. Coming back to you, Bradley. Gabby, you've had your hand raised very patiently, or maybe it's Luke. What's up?
Yeah, it's Luke. I think it was like a year ago. I fasted for a week, and there was a lot of spiritual clarity. My prayer life was improved. I felt kind of like a more clear communication with the Father, as well as I was delivering for Grubhub that whole week, and by the end of the week, I could literally smell each individual ingredient in the food. So it was wonderful.
Well, you know what? The nose is like spiritual perception, and that does not surprise me. That's a fascinating insight. It doesn't surprise me at all. That's awesome. Bradley has a microphone. What?
Sorry, Luke said spiritual clarity when we were still muted.
Oh, yeah. Spiritual clarity. I kind of interpreted that from when he was saying that what he could smell the ingredients of food. I thought that was fascinating. That's awesome. Brad.
Okay, there's a couple other things that were mentioned about eating, which was the bitter herbs. That seems like that would be easy to get, but what are your thoughts about maybe going to the special butcher shop and getting a lamb or goat, whatever?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great question. And we do. Have you been here for Passover yet? You have not. Okay, so good. I'm hoping you'll be here for Passover. We do like to go to the butcher shop and get a leg of lamb or two Okay? We also get some prime rib, and we eat a lot of meat. It is not a Passover sacrifice. I'm not going to a kosher butcher to get a kosherized lamb or something like that. But that's for the Passover meal. I like to do that. I know some Messianics that are like, they kind of adopt more of a Jewish tradition of, whoa, we ain't eating lamb in any way, shape, or form. We're going to eat chicken or something because we can't actually sacrifice a Passover lamb. Well, for me, there's no need to sacrifice a Passover lamb because I have a sacrifice of a Passover lamb. I want to be as close as I can be without crossing any lines. And I think, have a meal. And especially it would be interesting if you were to eat a meal with a lot of good meat and protein and then eat unleavened bread for 7 days straight. I think that would be a fascinating experiment. Gabby?
Do you guys hold a Passover gathering?
Absolutely.
So Xylia, my daughter, she's talking about going to see you guys for Passover, and Luke and I might tag along if you guys have space.
There's a possibility. Let us know as soon as possible because we get filled up quick and we have to close the gates. But yes.
Okay.
Tracy, microphone for Tracy, please. Thank you, Brett.
I know I've shared this before, but something that's just really meaningful to our family when we do our Passover is we kind of share a special moment with Abraham in regard to this Passover lamb, and that he looked forward to that day saying, Abba will provide for himself a lamb, my son. Right. And then it says in the place where he has said he has done it. It's something I'm not saying it correctly, but sure. Then we look back on that day and we say the same thing, and that's why we don't have a lamb here today, because he has been provided. Yahovah provided that lamb, and so it's more of a remembrance and an honoring of the sacrifice.
Cool.
Cool. Also, unleavened bread, I think, represents his body also, because and that our body as well, because Paul writes about purging out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump as you are unleavened. For even Messiah, our Passover, is sacrificed for us. Therefore, let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth, which is a representation of his word as well, without those man-made doctrines and
absolutely
whatnot.
Good insight. I think that's a good insight. I like that. That's a good practice. And you can do a messianic Jewish Seder kinda, and we do a little bit. It's definitely highly modified. I think that there is value in telling the story. Okay, that's the important part, because that's mentioned in the passage we just read regarding, if your children ask you, and they obviously will, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And you need to be able to say, why are we doing this? And I think the important part is that we are telling the story of what happened to our ancestors, A, and what that became, B, tying it together with Yeshua. Do I think that a Hebrew roots person, a Christian who is observing Torah to the best of their ability, needs to observe some kind of a Jewish Seder? No, of course not. But what I will say is this. There is tremendous value in a kind of a Jewish Seder simply for this reason, and I know that I've mentioned this to you before. The ways that a Jewish Seder are put together and how they are so clearly tied to Yeshua are astonishing. So it makes sense to me to take a Jewish Seder and modify it and say, look, the Jews have been observing this Seder for a long, long time. And unfortunately, they're experiencing spiritual blindness where they can't see what's right in front of them in such an explicit way. When you look at a traditional Hebrew Seder and you know who Yeshua is, you're like, wow, this program that they do on Passover is so obviously about Yeshua. That's why we do a slightly modified version, a heavily modified version of a Seder. Because we like to take their elements and go, they've been doing this for thousands of years. This is what it means when you look at it in the light of Yeshua. Now it's like, wow, that brings a tremendous amount of clarity. Now, if you've feel like you want to do something different, that's totally fine. There's only your tradition about how you want to memorialize the Passover observation is entirely up to you, provided that you are doing what is supposed to be done, which is to gather and observe it, memorialize it in some way, maybe eat unleavened bread, or at least not eat leavened bread, be circumcised physically or spiritually, however you intend to interpret that. We must not try to sacrifice an animal. We don't need to put blood on our doorposts. I have met Hebrew roots people who literally get some blood and put it on their doorposts. That is specific to the land of Israel, the land of Egypt. That has never mentioned again in the instructions for Passover. So, should we eat lamb or chicken or something else? It's up to you. It's totally fine. Should we eat it with our staff in our hands in haste and with shoes on? Whatever you want to do. If you want to interpret like, hey man, this is another kind of Exodus, second Exodus is coming. You know what? Maybe one day we will be asked to leave, or some people say raptured at that time of the, you won't need a bug out kit if you're going rapture, route. But my point is, there's open for a lot of different practices and how you want to do that. But there are some things that are commanded. I've given you some of the things about how we do it. And I would just say our Passover Seder is not open to the general public. So we say, if you want to bring this friend or that friend, no, primarily for one of the reasons that I spoke about previously, but also just as a practical matter. This house is only so big, and we can only comfortably seat and feed a fairly small number of people. So if you intend to get down on Passover with us, you need to sign up early and often. Fair enough? Any comments, questions, or concerns about that?
Sign me up.
Sign me up, yeah. No, I know that some of you also go to different fellowships. This seems to be a conglomeration where, some people come here, because we're meeting on Friday evening, and most Messianic places meet on Saturday, so they're like, hey, we get a double dip every week to do the Messianic fellowship. It's like, that's awesome. So some people will fellowship somewhere else, and some will fellowship here. Some will do both. It's all good to me.
I didn't do that.
So, yes, we will be having Passover here, and yes, you are welcome to join us, provided you get on early and let us know, and we have room for you. So, any other comments, questions, or concerns? It is Osmundo! Come on, dude, unmute yourself. What's up?
Sorry, I hit the wrong buttons. It started doing some weird stuff. Hey, I wanted to apologize because when I said, bring up the circumcision, I didn't know if anybody got offended because, I can't see the room, so I'm not really sure. So,
the room. It's all good. Does anybody want to go ahead and confess to being offended by Osmundo? Would like to take him to task? No, it's all good? Okay. You're good, Osmundo.
We can disagree, we don't have to be offended.
Yeah, we can disagree. We don't have to be offended. That's a great observation, Tracy.
Amen.
That is a very good observation. Gabby, what's up?
Hey, about the Seder, I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard that the Judeans, if you will, when they were keeping Passover after Yeshua died and ascended, that is when they started doing the Seder, and it wasn't done before that. It was done by Messianic, believers in Yeshua, and it's been passed down the generations since then. I heard it from, I don't remember where, but it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think that you could be right. I don't know. The only way I can guess that you would be able to find that information is in the Talmud or the Mishnah, but that wouldn't have been written until 300 AD, so that's a couple of hundred years later. It makes sense to me that, and here's something interesting. We do know that the disciples continued to go to the temple. Now here's a key question for you. Do they go to the temple on Passover and sacrifice a Passover lamb and observe that feast? Many of you are shaking your head. It would be a violation of the command not to.
Yeah, I don't think they attributed the lamb to anything more than following and being obedient. Yeshua
Okay,
was a
well,
lamb.
now hold
but
on a
here's what I
second.
was
Now
going to say.
hold on
brother.
a second. Hold
Think
on a
about
second.
this.
No,
You
no,
brought
no,
the
no,
lamb
no,
in your
no.
house.
Now hold on a second. Why wouldn't you, if you were doing this event every year and looking forward, didn't even know maybe that it was going to take on some mystical, powerful presaging of the future event, I presume that many people, especially the wise, would figure there's something strange about these feasts. They must presage some powerful event in the future. Okay, now, why wouldn't you, as a messianic, sit down for this memorial meal with Yeshua and he says, this is about me? Now, when it comes around next year, why wouldn't you just say, and this is what the book of Corinthians is talking about, when you get together, they are obviously still celebrating the Passover. It's just that it's not, they're not looking forward into some misty future going, I'm not sure what that means. They're looking with absolute clarity behind them and saying, now I fully understand what I'm doing.
No
So there's no
disagreement
reason
there.
to not observe the Passover just
Right.
because Yeshua has died. In fact, there's all the more reason to observe a Passover because Yeshua has died.
Right.
Osmundo.
Actually, if you remember in the book of Acts, where Paul was in the book, the book of Corinthians, where Paul was correcting that congregation because the one guy was sleeping with his stepmother. And Paul says, remove the leaven, a little leaven leavens a whole lump. And he says, let's continue the feast. So the wording, the verbiage in that passage indicates that they were actually keeping the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Of course.
Well, yeah, and he's talking specifically in those passages about when they get together, some of you are drunk and some of you are eating before people get there. Don't you have food at home? This is for a different purpose. So they had turned the Passover celebration into some kind of drunken festival.
Right.
Okay, it had become lewd or lascivious or something. They screwed it up. The Corinthian church is messed up. Both of those books are about a church that is very messed up and needs a lot of correction. So it's clear to me from those passages that, those believers are actually observing the Passover. They're just doing it completely wrong. They're not doing it with the right heart. So I don't think that even when the temple was still active, that if you go there and you get your lamb sacrifice and take it home and eat it, it just becomes that much more powerful of a demonstration to you because you know the real significance of that now. And then when the first fruits of the Bikurim come around, you're like, this, good Lord, look at this. And then all of a sudden you got Feast of Shavuot coming, good Lord, look at this. Everything is starting to make sense. And going to the temple to observe these holy days, now recognizing what you know about how Yeshua is fulfilling these things, it's like, man, it just becomes alive. I can't imagine why you wouldn't do that. And frankly, it would be a violation not to.
You ever think of why the kids were asking the parents about it? I think, a lot of older people, and myself included, were raised and able to slaughter animals. And a lot of the kids nowadays, they don't experience that. But to have a little lamb on 10 days in your house, for 4 days, it kind of becomes a pet.
Sure.
And then when you kill it in front of you, that's shocking.
It is shocking.
That's traumatic. And not many kids go through that trauma, but they would certainly ask, why are we doing this? This is
what are we doing?
pet.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a powerful thing. That is a powerful thing. So, good discussion, you guys. I have kept you too late. I apologize for that, and I appreciate you hanging out with us. It's been a wonderful time of discussion. I hope that you have learned something that you can apply in your lives that will bring you closer to our Father and in your walk with the Messiah Yeshua. Any comments, questions, or concerns for the good of the order? One final thing before I pray? We're all good? All right. Here we go.